17 years after vowing to change the world together, President Ibrahim Traoré steps out of his convoy and freezes. Under the blistering Ouagadougou sun, a man slumps against a cracked wall, barefoot, bruised, an empty tin trembling in his hands. That man once slipped young Ibrahim a single pencil so he could stay in school. Today he can't afford a crust of bread. Imagine the surge in your chest when the friend who lifted you high is now crushed by betrayal, poverty, and the ruthless weight of a world still scarred by racism and injustice. Do you walk past, or do you rewrite both your destinies in the next heartbeat? While the events you're about to witness are dramatized for storytelling, every emotion, hope, rage, heartbreak, redemption is drawn from real struggles millions face each day. This is not just a reunion. It is a collision of power and powerlessness, of the good we remember and the good we choose. And it all began with one look. It was one of those afternoons in Ouagadougou where the sun felt like it was punishing the ground. The streets shimmered under the heat, waves of distorted air rising from the pavement. Traffic roared and stuttered in every direction. Motorcycles zigzagged like dragonflies. Buses groaned under weight and heat, and vendors shouted from every corner, their voices blending into a chaotic urban chorus. The city pulsed with life, noisy, unfiltered, raw. Dust clung to everything: clothes, skin, windows, dreams. Even the air smelled like engine smoke, fried plantains, sweat, and something unspoken. Something tense, like an unresolved argument between the past and the present. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the small school compound wearing his usual olive shirt and rolled-up sleeves. No stiff suit, no bulletproof distance. He had just completed a surprise visit to a local public school. No cameras, no press. Just chalk dust and wide-eyed students who had never imagined the president would walk into their crumbling classroom and ask them what they needed. He smiled slightly, adjusting the strap of his watch, as he walked toward his convoy parked along the edge of the street. His security detail followed closely, scanning the crowd, maintaining formation. The streets buzzed around them, barely noticing that the most powerful man in the country was just a few meters away. And then, something happened. Ibrahim's steps slowed, his brow furrowed, eyes narrowing behind his dark glasses. He stopped walking altogether. "Wait," he said softly, lifting his hand. His guard stiffened, alert. But he wasn't looking at a threat. He was looking at something, or someone. Slumped against a scorched concrete wall, just beyond the crowd and half shadowed by a flickering billboard, sat a man. His posture was broken, back curled like a comma, face buried in his knees. A tin cup sat before him, holding only a few dirty coins and a single folded piece of bread. His clothes were tattered, the color of street dust. His feet were bare. His skin was sunburnt and his hair matted in places. But it wasn't just his condition that gripped Ibrahim. It was something in the angle of his shoulders, something in the curve of his jaw, something heartbreakingly familiar. Ibrahim took a slow step forward, then another. The street noise around him faded into a dull murmur. The blaring horns, the chatter, the world itself seemed to hush, as if time was holding its breath. "No, it can't be," he murmured. He crouched down slightly, ignoring the surprised murmurs of passers-by, the confused glance of his security team. The man lifted his head at the sound of footsteps. His eyes, though sunken, held a glint of recognition and disbelief. And in that instant, everything stopped. Not the traffic, not the sun, not the city, but time. Time stopped for Ibrahim Traoré. His voice cracked, not with authority, but with something far older. "Joseph!" The name barely made it out of his throat, but it cut through 20 years like a blade. The man blinked, as if not trusting his ears. Then slowly, almost painfully, he stood. His legs trembled, but his eyes never left the president's face. "Ibrahim?" His voice was dry, cracked, but laced with something ancient. Memory. They stood there, just two men on a dusty street corner in a city too busy to notice. But for those few seconds, president and beggar disappeared, and only two boys from the same classroom remained. One wearing worn shoes, the other no shoes at all. A few pedestrians stopped. Some pulled out their phones. A few even recognized the president, but none could understand what was happening. And yet, every story has a door. This moment, this accidental glance across a dust in time, was that door. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Joseph stared at the figure before him. Tall, upright, his face both older and stronger than he remembered. But those eyes, those were the same eyes that once blinked nervously in the back row of their schoolroom, struggling to read from a borrowed book. Joseph's lips parted, cracked and dry, but his voice didn't come right away. His brain hadn't yet accepted what his eyes saw. Ibrahim, too, stood frozen. His eyes scanned Joseph's face, searching for traces of the boy he once knew. The dust, the wrinkles, the scars. They tried to hide him, but they couldn't. Beneath the exhaustion and the street-worn layers was still his friend. The boy who once gave him a pencil when he had none. The boy who stayed back after class to help him understand equations. The boy who once said, "We're going to be something big one day, you and me." And now here he was, unwashed, barefoot, forgotten. Joseph's voice finally broke through the stillness, as fragile as a whisper, yet loud enough to shatter years of silence. "Ibrahim?" His name didn't sound presidential in that moment. It wasn't a title. It was a memory being pulled from a dying ember. Ibrahim stepped closer. "It's me," he said softly, as though he were afraid the words might scare Joseph away. "Joseph, my God, what happened to you?" Joseph let out a sharp breath, half a laugh, half a sob. He covered his face with one trembling hand. I never thought you'd see me like this." His eyes darted around, like a man caught naked in public. "Not like this." Tears welled in his eyes, and he turned his back, ashamed. His voice cracked again. You were always meant for greatness. I told them. I told everyone. Ibrahim would make it." Ibrahim reached out, placing a steady hand on Joseph's shoulder. "And you were the one who believed in me when no one else did." Joseph couldn't respond. His body shook. His feet wavered. The shame of years of slow collapse, of every time he was ignored or stepped over or spat at. It all swelled inside him, and now it had nowhere left to go but out, in the form of quiet, painful tears. But Ibrahim didn't flinch. He didn't recoil from the smell, the dirt, the rags. He simply turned toward his guards and said, with calm authority, "Open the door." A guard hesitated. "Sir, should we—" "Open." "The door," Ibrahim repeated, his tone firm but steady, his eyes never leaving Joseph. The armored black vehicle, polished, sleek, a symbol of presidential distance, stood there waiting. But when the door swung open, it became something else, a bridge between two worlds. Joseph stared at it, then at Ibrahim. He stepped back. "I can't get in. Not like this. Look at me." "I am," Ibrahim replied, "and all I see is my friend." "I'm dirty. I stink. "You're alive," Ibrahim interrupted, "and that's enough for me." Still unsure, Joseph hesitated at the curb. A passing motorcyclist slowed down, eyeing the strange scene. A man in rags speaking with the President of the Republic. A few people had begun filming from across the street. Ibrahim didn't care. Let them watch. Let the world see. He gently guided Joseph forward. With slow, hesitant steps, Joseph climbed into the vehicle, sitting gingerly on the edge of the seat as if afraid to soil it. The soft leather creaked under his weight. The car door shut, muffling the outside world. Inside the vehicle, silence returned. Not the silence of discomfort, but of memory. Ibrahim looked over and saw his friend curled slightly forward, trying not to cry. His fingers gripped his torn trousers. His lips trembled. The convoy began to move, and in the hush of the engine, Ibrahim whispered, "You're coming home with me." Joseph finally looked up. "Why?" Ibrahim's reply was simple. "Because once upon a time, when I had nothing, you shared what little you had. You never walked past me, and now I won't walk past you." Neither man spoke for the rest of the ride, but something had already begun to shift. Two lives, once side by side, then torn apart by time and pain, had just reconnected. And the story that followed would not be one of pity, but of restoration. And it had only just begun. The presidential residence stood like an island of silence in the heart of a city that never stopped moving. But that evening, behind its gates and tall white walls, it didn't feel like a fortress. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like shelter. Joseph sat on the edge of a plush armchair, the fabric too soft, too clean, like something his skin wasn't worthy of. He barely moved, shoulders hunched forward, hands folded tightly in his lap. His clothes, or what was left of them, had been taken away by a discreet staff member, replaced by a simple but spotless linen robe. The scent of fresh soap clung faintly to his arms. It had taken him nearly 30 minutes to finish his bath, not because it was long, but because he couldn't stop staring at the mirror, at the stranger who stared back. Ibrahim had insisted he eat. "Real food, Joseph," he said, not waiting for protest. The table was already set when Joseph emerged, hair still damp. A bowl of hot rice with sauce, grilled chicken, steamed yam. It all sat untouched for several minutes before Joseph finally picked up the spoon. He ate slowly, carefully, like someone afraid they might wake up from this. Across the table, Ibrahim said nothing. He watched with a quiet intensity, not of judgment, but of concern. He didn't rush the moment. He let Joseph settle, let him remember what it felt like to chew without guilt, to swallow without shame. When the meal was nearly finished and the silence had grown full instead of heavy, Ibrahim poured 2 glasses of juice. He placed one before Joseph, then sat back, his fingers laced together, elbows resting on the edge of the table. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "Now tell me, what happened to you, Joseph?" Joseph froze. The question landed not like a blow, but like a door creaking open in a dark room, one he'd kept locked for years. He looked down at the glass in front of him, hands trembling slightly. "I don't know where to begin," he murmured. "Anywhere," Ibrahim replied. "I just want to understand." Joseph hesitated. The words were there, coiled tight in his chest, hot behind his ribs. But so was the shame. How could he explain the slow unraveling of everything he once was? The loss, the betrayal, the nights sleeping under bridges, the looks people gave him, the stink of hopelessness that clung longer than any dirt. He looked up, eyes glassy but dry. "You really want to know?" Ibrahim nodded once. "I do." And just like that, the lock turned. Joseph leaned back in the chair, exhaled through his nose and whispered, "It started 3 years ago." But what came next would not just be a story. It would be the slow unearthing of a soul buried under lies, injustice, and heartbreak. And Ibrahim, friend, president, witness, was ready to hear it all. Joseph took a slow sip of the juice, then placed the glass down, staring at it as if it held the pieces of a life long lost. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, but only just. There was a quiet rhythm to his tone, like someone walking barefoot across shards of memory, trying not to bleed again. "I used to be someone people looked up to," he began, "principal of a secondary school in Bobo Dioulasso. It wasn't a fancy job, but it was honest. I loved my students. I loved teaching. I believed, truly believed, that education could fix more than just ignorance. It could fix broken homes, broken dreams, even broken countries." He paused, eyes distant. "I was never rich, but I had enough. Enough to buy a small plot of land, enough to slowly build a house, room by room, with my own hands, brick by brick on weekends, with whatever was left of my paycheck after paying school supplies and groceries. I didn't go out. I didn't drink. I just worked." Then his voice softened, dipped into something gentler. "That's when I met her. Stella." A small smile, almost imperceptible, crossed his face, quickly fading. "She was beautiful," he said, not with admiration, but with the air of someone observing a painting long removed from the wall. Sharp eyes, quick wit, confident. She walked into my life like she belonged there, and maybe for a moment she did. They met at a teacher training seminar. She taught French at a private school, spoke with precision, and carried herself like she knew her worth, and expected you to too. Joseph had been drawn to her light, her ambition, her laughter that filled rooms and left him standing still. "We courted for a year," he continued. "I saved up for a simple wedding. It was small, just family and a few colleagues. She moved into the house. I remember painting the bedroom the day before she arrived, making sure the sheets smelled of lavender, hiding a little note under her pillow that said, "Welcome home." He exhaled. Back then, I thought love meant giving everything. At first, things were warm. Dinners on the porch, conversations late into the night, laughter over half-burnt toast and mismatched socks. She called him mon professeur playfully, and he called her ma chance. But slowly, the rhythm shifted. Subtle things. She began spending more time on her phone, replying to messages with faint smirks he wasn't part of. Her eyes started to wander during meals. Conversations became one-sided, mostly his. He chalked it up to work stress. Private schools were demanding, he told himself. Maybe she was just tired. Then came the nights she came home late, the sudden interest in expensive perfumes and dresses she never wore around him, the coldness that crept into her touch. But Joseph, ever patient, ever hopeful, tried not to see it. I told myself it was a phase, he said, his voice tightening, that all marriages had their ups and downs, that she just needed time, space. He chuckled, not from humor but disbelief. I even bought her flowers once, the kind she used to like. She left them in the sink. He glanced at Ibrahim briefly, then looked away. I thought I was building a life, but in reality, I was just standing still while it quietly burned around me. There was a silence between them, not awkward, just heavy. The weight of truths that had been buried for too long now sat in the open, raw and undeniable. I was the last to see it, Joseph whispered. Everyone else probably knew before I did. My colleagues, her friends, maybe even the neighbors. But not me. He leaned back, eyes glossy but unflinching, because I didn't want to believe that something so carefully built could be so easily thrown away. And outside the window of the palace, the wind stirred slightly, as if the past itself had exhaled. Joseph looked down at his hands as he spoke, as if the lines in his palms could somehow explain how everything had slipped through them. His voice had changed, lower now, heavier. Each word felt like it carried weight from the past, dragging itself to the surface. It was a Thursday. I remember because we were preparing for a regional academic inspection, and the schedule had been moved. I left school earlier than usual, around 2 p.m., thinking I'd surprise her with pastries from that little street vendor she used to like. Lemon-filled ones. He smiled faintly, then let the expression dissolve. I unlocked the door like I always did. The house was quiet, curtains drawn, the air thick with a scent I couldn't name at first. It wasn't lavender. It wasn't food. It was something else. He paused. There were 2 glasses on the table. Wine. One half full, one smeared with lipstick. My stomach twisted. But I still thought, maybe it's just a friend. Maybe her sister dropped by. He looked out the window of the palace, eyes unfocused, caught in a moment long gone. I called her name once. No answer. I walked through the living room, then toward the bedroom. The door was slightly open, and that's when I saw them. His jaw clenched. They didn't hear me, or maybe they didn't care. He didn't describe the scene. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough. The kind of silence that only exists in the split second when a world ends. Not with a bang, but with a stillness so absolute it robs you of breath. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they'd grown roots. My hands wouldn't lift. My mouth went dry. There was this ringing in my ears like someone had dropped me underwater. I wasn't angry. Not yet, just empty. He let out a breath, shaky but controlled. I stepped back. My shoulder bumped the doorframe. That's when they noticed me. She didn't scream. She didn't cover herself. She didn't even flinch. He turned slowly to face Ibrahim. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You weren't supposed to be home yet." Ibrahim didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply listened, eyes locked on Joseph. Not as a president, but as a friend sitting across a wound too large for bandages. Joseph continued, his tone tighter now. She got dressed slowly, walked out of the room like it was nothing. He followed, buttoning his shirt, not even pretending to be embarrassed. She stood there in the hallway and said, "It's over, Joseph." I've moved on. I love him now. Just like that. He gave a bitter laugh. Short, hollow. I told her it was my house, that she couldn't just decide something like that. She laughed, said I could either leave quietly or she'd make things harder for me. And she meant it. He rubbed his eyes, the first sign of weariness breaking through the composure. She told me to pack and go, that I'd built the house with her support, financial, emotional, everything. Said she had proof, said I was unstable, said I was jealous. He looked down at the table again. That night I didn't sleep. I sat outside on the porch until morning. I kept hoping she'd come out, apologize, say it was a mistake, that it was heat, confusion, something. But the lights stayed on, and they laughed inside. I could hear them laugh. Joseph's voice dropped to a whisper. And that's when I knew. I hadn't just lost a wife. I had lost my home, my dignity, my place in the world. The silence that followed was long and deep. Finally, Ibrahim spoke, voice heavy. Joseph, I'm so sorry. But Joseph only nodded once, slowly. It was the day everything collapsed, he said, and I haven't stopped falling since. Joseph's voice grew quieter, but the pain beneath it only sharpened. What had begun as heartbreak had now hardened into something colder, more jagged, betrayal laced with humiliation. 3 days after I walked out of that house, I received a court summons. He let the words settle. She had filed a lawsuit claiming partial ownership of the house, said she helped finance it, said she had proof, receipts, transfers, even witness statements from her side of the family. Ibrahim frowned. But the house was yours. I built it before we married, Joseph said, his voice strained. Every block, every bag of cement came from my salary. I kept the receipts in a drawer, but that drawer was in the house. Her house now. He shook his head slowly. She had everything. I had nothing. Nothing but my word. The court hearings dragged on for weeks. Joseph showed up in the same shirt, face weary, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Stella, in contrast, arrived with perfect makeup, polished shoes, and a confident smile. Her lawyer spoke with calm precision. Joseph could barely afford his, and the courtroom listened more closely to clean documents than to tired voices. She even brought fake evidence, Joseph said, forged bank statements, a fabricated loan agreement, claimed I owed her money. Did the judge believe her? Joseph nodded, his jaw clenched. He said the documentation was clear, that I had no proof to the contrary. He ruled in her favor, ordered me to vacate the house within 14 days. Ibrahim sat back, stunned. That's madness. Joseph didn't answer immediately. His fingers brushed the edge of the glass on the table, tracing circles. The day I left the courthouse, it was raining. I remember because I didn't have an umbrella, and I didn't care. I walked until I couldn't feel my legs. No destination, no plan. He looked up. Then came the whispers, rumors at school, colleagues avoiding me in the halls. Some said I'd hit her, others said I cheated. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. When you're the man who loses the house, people assume it's your fault. Eventually, the school's board called him in. They said he needed time to rebuild his life, that the scandal was a distraction. They didn't fire him, not directly, but they didn't renew his contract either. And in silence, Joseph disappeared from the very halls where he had once been applauded. No job, no home, no family, no voice, he whispered. I stayed with a friend for a few weeks, slept on his couch. But the shame, it followed me. I couldn't eat in front of his children, couldn't look his wife in the eye. So Joseph left, carrying nothing but a plastic bag of clothes and a past no one wanted to hear. He wandered the streets during the day and slept beneath a bridge at night, the same bridge he once passed as a young man on his way to class. I began to beg, he said, not as a confession, but as a simple truth. Not because I was lazy, not because I wanted to, but because hunger makes you do things pride would never allow. And in that moment, the man who once held a classroom in the palm of his hand was holding out a tin cup instead. The car rolled through the security gates of the presidential residence with silent authority. Guards saluted, cameras followed discreetly, but no one dared ask questions. Inside the vehicle, Joseph sat motionless, eyes darting nervously between the passing trees, the high compound walls, and the man beside him, his childhood friend, now head of state. It all felt surreal, like a dream he was too afraid to believe in. When the car finally stopped in a shaded courtyard, a uniformed aide opened the door and greeted him with a soft, "Welcome, sir." Joseph hesitated, unsure whether to step out or apologize for soiling the floor. But Ibrahim nodded gently, giving him the assurance he didn't have the words for. He stepped out. The marble tiles felt cool under his bare feet. A staff member, polite, expressionless, guided him to a quiet guest wing. They didn't flinch at his tattered robe or his unwashed hair. No questions, just kindness wrapped in formality. As they opened the door to the room prepared for him, Joseph stood frozen at the threshold. The room was softly lit, with cream-colored walls and tall windows framed by flowing curtains. A bed stood in the center, wide and inviting, its blankets tucked tight, pillows puffed with care. A folded towel and a set of new clothes lay on a small table beside a steaming basin of warm water. He hadn't seen a bed like that in years. "Please rest," the attendant said. "Dinner will be served shortly." When the door clicked shut behind him, Joseph remained still for a full minute. Then slowly he reached out and ran his fingers along the edge of the bed. The fabric was impossibly soft, the kind of softness he once associated with wealthy hotels, the kind he only saw in magazines stacked in waiting rooms. He looked at his reflection in the mirror across the room. Thinner than he remembered, older, but somehow still here. He took a long, hesitant bath. The water, scented faintly with eucalyptus, washed over the scars, not just on his skin, but on his soul. When he stepped out, wrapped in a clean robe, the world felt distant, muted. Was this how it had always felt to be safe? A knock interrupted his thoughts. A young woman brought in a tray of food, grilled fish, seasoned vegetables, steaming rice, and a bowl of clear broth. A glass of cold water, beads of condensation dripping onto the silver tray, sat beside it. He ate slowly. Each bite awakened something forgotten. Not just hunger, but dignity. He chewed in silence as if speaking might shatter the moment. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him, the man who used to stand at chalkboards and say, "You can do better," stirred ever so slightly. Later, as he slipped into the bed, he hesitated again. He sat at the edge, staring at the clean white sheets. He didn't want to ruin them, didn't want to make anything dirty, but fatigue was stronger. He laid down carefully, as if the bed might reject him. The mattress seemed to cradle him, the sheets cool against his skin, the pillow firm and gentle beneath his head. He stared at the ceiling. No mosquitoes buzzing, no wind biting through torn clothes, no footsteps above his bridge, no fear, just silence. A silence so full of kindness, it brought tears to his eyes. He didn't know when he fell asleep. Only that, for the first time in years, he slept without flinching. No nightmares, no hunger pangs, no echoes of Stella's laughter in his ears. Just rest, deep, uninterrupted, and undeservedly sweet. When the morning light crept through the curtains, Joseph was still sleeping, curled into the warmth of a new beginning, unaware that this was only the first page of a story waiting to be rewritten. And somewhere else in the palace, Ibrahim sat alone in his study, staring at an old class photo. His eyes lingered on one boy, not himself, but the one beside him, holding a pencil too short to write with, but still smiling like he had everything. It was time to give that boy his life back. The morning sun poured gently through the sheer curtains of the guest room, touching Joseph's face like a hand that hadn't dared reach for him in years. He stirred slowly, blinking into the unfamiliar brightness. For a moment he didn't know where he was. No cement under his back, no wind against his skin, just warmth, stillness, clean sheets and the quiet hum of morning. A soft knock echoed through the room. Before Joseph could respond, a voice came from behind the door. "Good morning, sir. President Ibrahim asks if you'll join him for a drive this morning." Joseph sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, unsure whether he was still dreaming. A drive? With the president? A few minutes later, he stepped outside wearing the simple, clean clothes left for him. Crisp cotton trousers, a pale shirt that smelled faintly of citrus. His hair still damp, his face freshly washed, but his hands nervously clenched at his sides. Ibrahim was already waiting by the car, dressed in a relaxed shirt and slacks, without any formal escort. Just the two of them. "Ready?" Ibrahim asked with a smile. I I think so," Joseph replied, uncertain. They drove without speaking at first. The streets of Ouagadougou passed quietly outside the windows. This time Joseph looked at them not from the curb, but from the passenger seat of a presidential car. The city felt different from this angle, not kinder but less hostile. Their first stop was a private clinic, discreet, clean, tucked behind a garden of hibiscus and jacaranda. Joseph hesitated as they walked in, but Ibrahim simply placed a hand on his back. "Don't worry, just routine. You need to know how your heart is doing, inside and out." The doctor greeted them warmly, conducted a thorough checkup: blood pressure, lungs, eyes, heart rate. Joseph tried to make light of it, but Ibrahim was quietly watching every result, every frown from the doctor, as if reading tea leaves that might reveal just how much time had been stolen from his friend. From there, they moved to a small barbershop, the kind where the chairs were heavy, the mirrors tall, and the smell of shaving cream clung to the air like an old song. The barber raised an eyebrow when he saw them walk in, but said nothing. Ibrahim simply nodded once, and the man got to work. Joseph sat stiffly at first, unused to being touched with care. The razor glided along his jawline, trimming away not just the beard but the years it represented. Hair snipped, sideburns shaped, a warm towel pressed to his face. By the time the chair turned toward the mirror, Joseph was bracing himself. He chuckled, not from humor but disbelief. "I even bought her flowers once, the kind she used to like. She left them in the sink." He glanced at Ibrahim briefly, then looked away. "I thought I was building a life, but in reality I was just standing still while it quietly burned around me." There was a silence between them, not awkward, just heavy. The weight of truths that had been buried for too long now sat in the open, raw and undeniable. "I was the last to see it," Joseph whispered. "Everyone else probably knew before I did. My colleagues, her friends, maybe even the neighbors, but not me." He leaned back, eyes glossy but unflinching. "Because I didn't want to believe that something so carefully built could be so easily thrown away." And outside the window of the palace, the wind stirred slightly, as if the past itself had exhaled. Joseph looked down at his hands as he spoke, as if the lines in his palms could somehow explain how everything had slipped through them. His voice had changed, lower now, heavier. Each word felt like it carried weight from the past, dragging itself to the surface. "It was a Thursday. I remember because we were preparing for a regional academic inspection, and the schedule had been moved. I left school earlier than usual, around 2 p.m., thinking I'd surprise her with pastries from that little street vendor she used to like, lemon-filled ones." He smiled faintly, then let the expression dissolve. "I unlocked the door like I always did. The house was quiet, curtains drawn, the air thick with a scent I couldn't name at first. It wasn't lavender. It wasn't food. It was something else." He paused. There were 2 glasses on the table, wine, one half full, one smeared with lipstick. My stomach twisted, but I still thought, maybe it's just a friend. Maybe her sister dropped by. He looked out the window of the palace, eyes unfocused, caught in a moment long gone. "I called her name once. No answer. I walked through the living room, then toward the bedroom. The door was slightly open, and that's when I saw them." His jaw clenched. They didn't hear me, or maybe they didn't care. He didn't describe the scene. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough, the kind of silence that only exists in the split second when a world ends. Not with a bang, but with a stillness so absolute, it robs you of breath. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they'd grown roots. My hands wouldn't lift. My mouth went dry. There was this ringing in my ears like someone had dropped me underwater. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just empty. He let out a breath, shaky but controlled. I stepped back. My shoulder bumped the doorframe. That's when they noticed me. She didn't scream. She didn't cover herself. She didn't even flinch. He turned slowly to face Ibrahim. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You weren't supposed to be home yet." Ibrahim didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply listened, eyes locked on Joseph, not as a president, but as a friend sitting across a wound too large for bandages. Joseph continued, his tone tighter now. She got dressed slowly, walked out of the room like it was nothing. He followed, buttoning his shirt, not even pretending to be embarrassed. She stood there in the hallway and said, "It's over, Joseph. I've moved on. I love him now." Just like that. He gave a bitter laugh, short, hollow. I told her it was my house, that she couldn't just decide something like that. She laughed, said I could either leave quietly or she'd make things harder for me. And she meant it. He rubbed his eyes, the first sign of weariness breaking through the composure. She told me to pack and go, that I'd built the house with her support, financial, emotional, everything. Said she had proof, said I was unstable, said I was jealous. He looked down at the table again. That night I didn't sleep. I sat outside on the porch until morning. I kept hoping she'd come out, apologize, say it was a mistake, that it was heat, confusion, something. But the light stayed on, and they laughed inside. I could hear them laugh. Joseph's voice dropped to a whisper. And that's when I knew. I hadn't just lost a wife. I had lost my home, my dignity, my place in the world. The silence that followed was long and deep. Finally, Ibrahim spoke, voice heavy. "Joseph, I'm so sorry." But Joseph only nodded once, slowly. "It was the day everything collapsed," he said, "and I haven't stopped falling since." Joseph's voice grew quieter, but the pain beneath it only sharpened. What had begun as heartbreak had now hardened into something colder, more jagged. Betrayal laced with humiliation. 3 days after I walked out of that house, I received a court summons. He let the words settle. She had filed a lawsuit claiming partial ownership of the house, said she helped finance it, said she had proof, receipts, transfers, even witness statements from her side of the family. And then he saw it. The reflection staring back at him was not the broken man he had grown used to avoiding. It was someone else, someone he hadn't seen in years. The cheeks were thinner, yes, and the eyes more weathered. But there was something unmistakable. Dignity, a flicker of it, hiding behind the uncertainty. He raised his hand, touched his cheek. The man in the mirror did the same. For a moment his throat closed. "I look like me," he whispered. Ibrahim stepped behind him, resting a hand on the back of the chair. His eyes met Joseph's in the mirror. "You were always you," he said. "You just forgot." But I didn't. Joseph blinked fast, swallowing the rising lump in his throat. He turned slowly toward Ibrahim. "Why are you doing all this?" Ibrahim didn't hesitate. "Because once, when I couldn't afford a textbook, you gave me yours. When I was bullied for not wearing shoes, you stood between me and them. When no one believed I could be something, you told me I already was. You were there for me, Joseph." His voice softened. "Now let me be here for you." Joseph didn't reply, but his eyes said everything. Gratitude, disbelief, and something new. Or perhaps something long buried. Hope. They stepped out into the daylight. The sun felt less harsh now, the streets less cruel. A promise had been made, not with ceremony or headlines, but with action. Quiet, steady, undeniable. And for the first time in years, Joseph didn't feel invisible. The car turned off the main road and began weaving through a quieter part of the city. A neighborhood tucked behind rows of leafy trees and weathered fences. It wasn't the kind of place where embassies stood or officials lived. It was peaceful, modest, and quiet. The kind of place where neighbors still greeted each other in the morning and where children chased after stray chickens in the yard. Joseph sat silently in the passenger seat, unsure of where they were going. He had stopped asking questions. Everything about the past 24 hours had felt like walking through a story that didn't belong to him. The palace, the doctor, the haircut, the fresh clothes. Each step brought him closer to something unknown, but he still carried the weight of everything he had lost. The car slowed, then stopped in front of a small cream-colored house with brown shutters and a green roof. A short brick path led from the gate to the front porch, where two potted plants stood like sentries on either side of the door. There was a small garden to the left, a wooden bench under a neem tree, and the faint sound of birdsong in the air. Joseph looked at the house, then at Ibrahim, puzzled. "Whose place is this?" Ibrahim didn't answer at first. He stepped out of the car and waited for Joseph to follow. Joseph did cautiously, his feet unsure against the paved path. They stood in front of the little house, the late afternoon sun casting long, soft shadows across the steps. Then Ibrahim turned to him. "This is your house now." Joseph blinked. "What?" "It's yours, paid in full. The title, the keys, everything." He laughed nervously, as if it were a joke. "Ibrahim, come on. I can't." "You can," Ibrahim said, gently but firmly. "You deserve more than this. But this is a start." Joseph took a step back, shaking his head. His throat tightened, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. The wind stirred the leaves above them, but the world around him seemed to pause. I had a house," he finally whispered, barely audible. "I built it with my own hands. I lost it. I thought I'd never have one again." "You didn't lose it," Ibrahim said quietly. "It was stolen from you, but no one can steal this. No one will ever take it from you again." Joseph's lips parted, but no sound came. His face crumpled, not with pain, but with something deeper. Grief and gratitude colliding all at once. Tears spilled down his cheeks silently, like rain that had been waiting years to fall. He covered his face with both hands and turned slightly away, ashamed of how freely the emotion poured out. But Ibrahim stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was restoration. And in front of that small house, surrounded by silence and the faint rustling of trees, Joseph let go of the shame, of the rage, of the nights under bridges and the days of being invisible. He let it all fall, and for the first time in a very long time, he stood on something solid, his own ground. A week after moving into his new home, Joseph stood in front of a small storefront painted in soft ochre with dark wooden trim. The sign above read, in clean block letters, "Papyrus Book and Supply." There was no crowd, no ribbon cutting, no grand ceremony. Just Joseph, Ibrahim, and a quiet understanding between them. The store stood beside a secondary school on the edge of the city, a place bustling with students in faded uniforms and teachers who looked tired but determined. It was the perfect location, Ibrahim had said, because Joseph had once said, "Books are most powerful when placed nearest to those still growing." Inside, the shelves were already stocked. Textbooks, notebooks, pens, rulers, dictionaries, learning posters, sharpeners, neatly arranged by subject, by level. Everything had been prepared without Joseph needing to ask. On the counter stood a small ledger, its first page blank, waiting for his handwriting. Joseph walked in slowly, fingertips grazing the edge of the bookshelves. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air smelled like new paper and faint glue, a scent that, to him, was better than perfume. This was not just a business. It was a resurrection. "You'll run this place," Ibrahim had said that morning. "I'll cover the cost for the first year. After that, it's yours. Sink or soar, it's your ship now." And so Joseph began. At first he was hesitant. The first student who walked in, a nervous boy clutching crumpled money in his hand, asked for a math set. Joseph fumbled with the register, trying not to appear uncertain. But the boy thanked him twice before leaving, and something small and warm stirred in Joseph's chest. By the end of the week, he knew how to restock, how to track sales, how to greet customers without flinching. Students began coming more often. Some recognized him from before. Whispers started, "Isn't that Mr. Joseph? Didn't he used to be?" But no one said it aloud. What they did say was, "Sir, do you have an extra ruler?" Or, "Sir, can you help me find the right science book?" And Joseph, the same man who once begged for coins with his eyes on the ground, began to lift his chin when he spoke. He didn't just sell supplies, he offered advice. He told one student to take extra notes in biology if she wanted to pass. He reminded another to stop lending out his pens. He taught a third how to use a calculator properly. They began to linger, not because they needed more things, but because they liked how he made them feel. Seen, smart, capable. Teachers stopped by too. Some brought their own supplies. Others came just to say hello. One gave him a used chalkboard for the back wall. Another donated old literature books, saying, "The kids need someone like you." Before long, he became something more than a shopkeeper. He became Sir Joseph again. Not a title he demanded, but one they returned to him, piece by piece, like someone carefully rebuilding a broken statue. He swept the floor every evening, rearranged displays, cleaned the windows himself, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Every inch of the space was a reminder. This life, this second chance, had been earned not just through kindness, but through quiet perseverance. One afternoon, as he stepped outside to stretch, a young girl passed by and waved. "Good afternoon, Mr. Joseph." He blinked. It had been years since someone had called him that with respect. He raised his hand and waved back. Inside the shop, the sun slanted across the counter, casting shadows that looked like chapters waiting to be written. He wasn't begging anymore. He was building. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind Joseph had come to cherish. The shop had emptied after the school rush, and the golden light of late day slanted gently through the windows. He was at the back, rearranging a stack of geography textbooks, when the bell above the door rang softly. He glanced up, half expecting another student or perhaps one of the teachers dropping by with lesson plans to print. But the moment his eyes landed on the doorway, his body tensed. Standing there, framed in sunlight and shadow, was a woman he once knew intimately, and yet now she looked almost unrecognizable. Stella. Her once radiant skin had dulled with fatigue and sun. Her eyes, once sharply lined and filled with certainty, were bare, tired, and rimmed with something close to fear. Her clothes, once designer, pressed and proud, now hung awkwardly on her thinner frame, wrinkled and mismatched. In one hand she held a small, battered suitcase. In the other, nothing but her trembling fingers. Joseph didn't move. He couldn't. For a second his breath caught in his throat, as if the air itself refused to carry the weight of her presence. Stella stepped inside slowly, her gaze lowered. "Joseph," she said, her voice thin, barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He swallowed, spine straightening. The echo of her name bounced inside his chest like a coin dropped in an empty well. She looked around the shop as if only now realizing where she was. "This place is nice." Joseph didn't reply. He stepped out from behind the shelves and walked toward the front counter. When he stopped, he didn't invite her to sit. He didn't ask what she wanted. He only said evenly, "Why are you here?" Stella took a breath, shaky and shallow. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. He left me." Joseph didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "He sold the house," she continued, her voice quickening now, as if trying to outrun the shame. "Emptied the account. Everything. I thought I had security, but he took it all and disappeared with someone younger. I have nothing." She looked up at him then, eyes glossy, lips trembling. "I've been sleeping in a friend's spare room for weeks, but they're moving. I can't stay. I remembered this place. I saw the pictures online, the news, and I thought..." Her words broke off. "I thought maybe you could let me stay, just for a while." Silence pressed between them, thick, heavy, nearly unbearable. Joseph looked at the woman in front of him, the same woman who had once looked him in the eye, in his own home, and told him to leave, who had humiliated him, erased him, and taken everything he had built. And now here she was, smaller, diminished, asking to step back into the space she had once burned to the ground. He took a slow breath, then another. "Do you remember," he said softly, "when I stood in the living room and begged you to talk to me, to give us a chance, to not humiliate me in court?" His voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It was calm, frighteningly calm. "Do you remember what you told me?" Stella blinked. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Joseph, I'm sorry." You told me I was nothing without you, he said. And now, here you are. She stepped closer, just a little. Please, just one room. I won't stay long, I promise. He looked at the suitcase, then at her, then past her, through the shop window, toward the setting sun. I forgave you a long time ago, Stella, he said, but forgiveness is not a return ticket. She didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Joseph stepped back, his voice gentle but final. This shop, this life, it's my piece, and I won't risk losing it again. I wish you well, but this is not your home. And just like that, he turned away. The bell rang again as the door opened and slowly closed behind her. Joseph stood there for a moment, heart pounding. Not from anger, but from the weight of a door he had finally, truly shut. Joseph stood behind the bookstore counter, listening to the faint tap of Stella's shoes retreating down the pavement. The bell's echo still lingered in the wooden rafters, like a question left unanswered. A moment ago, he had faced the woman who once dismantled his life. Now he faced silence. And for the first time, it did not frighten him. He exhaled slowly, steadying his pulse. The shop smelled of paper and fresh ink, anchors that held him in the present. In the reflection of the front window, he saw himself, shirt sleeves rolled up, posture straight, eyes clear. No rage, no need for vindication, only a quiet, resolute calm. A student's soft knock on the doorframe startled him. "Sir, are you still open?" the boy asked, clutching a history workbook. Joseph managed a gentle smile. "Of course," he replied, voice steady. He rang up the purchase, offered a study tip about timelines, and watched the teenager leave with a grateful grin, unaware that moments earlier, a chapter of Joseph's own past had walked out in tears. When the street finally emptied, Joseph flipped the sign to closed and locked up. Outside, the dusk sky glowed orange, casting long shadows between the buildings. Instead of heading home, he chose the longer path through a narrow lane lined with neem trees. Each step felt deliberate, grounding. He thought of Stella's sunken face, her trembling hands. Pity stirred within him, but it did not open any doors. He reached his modest house just as the first evening cicadas began their chorus. On the porch, he sat in the wooden chair Ibrahim had given him and watched the last light fade. Memories drifted across his mind. Nights sleeping under the bridge, the first morning waking in this bed, the first "Good afternoon, Mr. Joseph," from a student. Those recollections no longer hurt. They felt like proof that pain could be repurposed into strength. He rose, entered the house, and made a simple dinner: rice, lentils, and sautéed spinach. As he ate, he replayed that single decisive sentence spoken in the shop. "I forgave you long ago, but this house is not your home." The words had come without effort, as natural as breathing. They were true. Forgiveness had set him free long before Stella walked through his door. What she wanted now, entry into the peace he had rebuilt, was something forgiveness did not guarantee. After washing the dishes, he dialed Ibrahim. The president's voice came warm through the line. Joseph recounted the encounter in a few spare sentences. There was a brief silence, then Ibrahim said, "I'm proud of you." Joseph felt the corners of his mouth curve upward. "I didn't shout," he replied, surprised by his own composure. "I just closed the chapter." Ibrahim's quiet laugh carried through the receiver. "That is the loudest victory, my friend." Phone cradled to his ear, Joseph stepped outside again. The air was cool now, scented with night-blooming flowers from a neighbor's yard. Stars were beginning to pierce the charcoal sky. He realized that the ache he once feared would swallow him was gone. In its place was an expansive stillness, a space wide enough for new chapters, new people, new dreams. He whispered a soft goodnight to Ibrahim, hung up and lingered on the porch a moment longer. The past had knocked. He had opened the door, spoken kindness, and shut it with grace. Tomorrow the bell would ring, students would laugh, pages would turn, and Joseph, no longer beggar, no longer victim, would greet them all with steady hands and unburdened heart. It was a Tuesday morning, unusually quiet for the bookstore. The usual wave of students had come and gone with the early bell, and Joseph was restocking a shelf of grammar workbooks near the front window. The sunlight filtered through the glass, casting soft golden squares across the floor, and the sound of passing bicycles and distant school bells provided a gentle background hum. The bell above the door jingled. Joseph looked up and saw a woman step inside, moving with the kind of grace that comes not from elegance, but from steadiness. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her calm eyes and had a stack of notebooks tucked under one arm. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few strands catching the light. She offered a polite smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth, clear. "Good morning," Joseph replied, setting down the book in his hands. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for mathematics textbooks, senior school level. I teach at the secondary across the street," she said, glancing around. "Of course. Right this way." He guided her to the shelf in the far corner, walking with quiet steps, unsure why his pulse seemed to quicken. She followed, her attention scanning the titles, fingertips brushing the spines with familiarity. "This one," she said, picking out a worn but thorough edition. "My students struggle with word problems. This explains them simply." Joseph nodded. "It's one of the better ones. Clear examples, good exercises. I used to teach too." She looked at him, eyebrows raised slightly, surprised. "Really?" "Principal, actually," he added, offering a shy smile. Before the bookstore." There was no need to explain further. She didn't ask. Her expression softened instead. "That explains the way you arrange the reading corner. Organized by subject and student level. That's a teacher's mind." He chuckled quietly. Guilty. Back at the counter, she handed him the book and watched as he rang it up and wrapped it neatly. "You're different from other shopkeepers," she said casually. "You listen. You explain." "Old habit," he replied. She extended her hand. "I'm Grace." He paused for a moment, then shook it gently. "Joseph." Her grip was warm, confident. Just as she turned to leave, a small voice called from the doorway. "Mama!" A girl no older than 7 bounded into the shop, curly hair bouncing, eyes bright and curious. She wore a school pinafore and held a crayon drawing in one hand. "That's my daughter Rachel," Grace said with a smile. Rachel ran straight to her and tugged on her arm. "Can we stay a little?" "I want to look at the books." Joseph laughed softly. "Of course. We have a small children's shelf near the back. She's welcome anytime." "Did you draw that?" he asked Rachel. She nodded and proudly held it up. It was a slightly crooked tree with too many apples, but the sun had a smiley face and the house had flowers. "It's beautiful," he said. Grace watched quietly as Rachel skipped toward the back shelf, humming to herself. "She loves books," Grace said, "and stories. She misses her father sometimes. He passed 5 years ago. Books help her feel less alone." "I understand," Joseph said gently. "Books saved me too." The conversation drifted to safer ground. School challenges, neighborhood repairs, shared frustration about rising prices of school supplies. It was easy, natural, like two old friends who had never met before. As Grace and Rachel left, she turned once more at the door. "We'll probably be back," she said. "Rachel already loves this place." Joseph watched them go, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. The door swung closed behind them, but the space they'd filled didn't feel empty. Later that day, when the last customer had gone and Joseph was locking up, he paused for a long moment, staring at the little crayon drawing Rachel had left behind on the reading table. He smiled. It had been a long time since someone entered his life not to take something, but to simply be present, and sometimes the softest steps leave the deepest prints. In the weeks that followed, Grace and Rachel became regular fixtures in Joseph's life, like sunlight slowly stretching across a room that had been dark for far too long. They would visit the shop after school, Grace sometimes looking for lesson materials, sometimes just stopping by to say hello. Rachel would dash in first, a whirlwind of chatter and curiosity, her tiny hands already reaching for picture books or colored pencils. She started calling Joseph Uncle Joe after the 3rd visit, without warning or hesitation, and he didn't correct her. He liked the sound of it more than he expected. One afternoon, while Grace graded papers at a corner table, Rachel tugged at Joseph's sleeve. "Uncle Joe, can you help me with this word?" He bent down beside her and looked at the storybook she held. The word was enormous. "Big," he said gently. "It means really, really big. Like the sky." Rachel's eyes widened. Wow, can I use it in my drawing? Absolutely, he smiled. He showed her how to spell it slowly, letter by letter, and she repeated after him with careful joy. From that day on, helping with words became their daily ritual. Joseph set up a small reading corner just for Rachel. 2 cushions, a low table, and a box labeled Rachel's Picks. They read together, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for hours. He found himself looking forward to those moments. The way she tilted her head when puzzled, the way she smiled when she got a word right. Grace noticed the change in Joseph long before he admitted it to himself. "You laugh more now," she said one day as they closed up the shop together. "Do I?" he replied, genuinely surprised. "Yes," she said with a soft smile. "Your eyes used to carry too many shadows. Now, there's something lighter in them." Joseph looked away for a moment, unsure of what to say. For so long he had guarded his heart like a house with broken locks, afraid of letting anything in again. But somehow Grace and Rachel had slipped in through the windows. Not forcefully, but gently, with warmth instead of demands. He found himself telling Grace small things, about his favorite books as a child, the jokes he used to share with students, even about the fig tree his father had planted in their backyard. Grace listened, not out of obligation, but with genuine interest. She didn't ask about Stella, didn't pry into scars not yet ready to be revealed. She simply sat with him, cup of tea in hand, her presence steady and kind. One evening, as Rachel napped on a chair, her tiny hand clutching a pencil stub, Grace and Joseph sat in the quiet, sipping tea and watching the sun dip behind the buildings. "I thought I was done," Joseph said quietly, "that I'd used up all the pieces of myself." Grace turned to him. "Maybe you just needed different hands to help you gather them." He didn't reply, but his silence was no longer heavy. It was full of comfort, of gratitude, of something tender and growing. In the stillness of that moment, surrounded by books and soft breathing and fading sunlight, Joseph realized something was changing inside him. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but undeniably. For the first time in years, his heart was no longer just beating. It was healing. It was a warm Sunday afternoon when Joseph led Grace and little Rachel to a quiet garden just beyond the city's edge. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden ribbons. The garden had once been neglected, but Joseph had been coming here in secret, trimming weeds, planting flowers, and clearing a spot beneath an old neem tree, where the air always seemed still and sacred. He had told Grace they were going for a walk. He hadn't told her why his hands trembled slightly in his pockets. They reached the tree, and Rachel darted ahead, chasing a butterfly. Grace, watching her with a soft smile, didn't notice at first that Joseph had stopped walking. When she turned back, he was already kneeling. Not dramatically, not in fanfare, just steady, honest, and on one knee, holding a small ring tucked inside a folded handkerchief. Grace froze. Joseph looked up at her, his eyes gentle and unwavering. "I don't have much," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "and I never will promise the world, but I can offer you something better. I offer peace, respect, and love." Grace's lips parted, but no words came. "I was broken once," he continued, "but you and Rachel, you didn't try to fix me. You just sat beside me until I remembered how to breathe again." Rachel came toddling back and gasped when she saw Joseph kneeling. "Are you giving Mama a treasure?" she asked, eyes wide. Joseph chuckled and nodded. "The most precious one I have." Grace finally found her voice. It shook, but it was clear. "Yes, Joseph. 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, simple, silver, and meaningful, and stood as Rachel wrapped her arms around them both, giggling and shouting, "We're going to be a family." The wedding was small, just as they wanted. Held beneath the same neem tree weeks later, surrounded by a handful of friends, a few students, and several curious neighbors. There were no golden chandeliers, no orchestras, no towering cakes. Just white fabric draped gently from branches, wildflowers in mason jars, and smiles that stretched wider than any cathedral arch. And standing proudly in the second row, wearing a modest suit and an expression of quiet pride, was President Ibrahim Traoré. After the vows, he pulled Joseph aside, his handshake firm, his voice soft with emotion. "You look like a man who has truly come home," he said. Joseph nodded, eyes shining. "I am, not just to a place, but to myself." As the sun dipped below the horizon and soft music played from a single speaker, Joseph and Grace danced slowly under the stars. Rachel twirled around them, her laughter rising like music of its own. The world for a moment held its breath. Here was a man once buried by shame and betrayal, now lifted by love, by second chances, by the hands of those who believed in him. And in that quiet garden, beneath a sky lit not by chandeliers but by stars, Joseph's new life truly began. Not long after his wedding, Joseph sat at the back of his bookstore, staring out the window as the light fell across the street. Students were heading home, their backpacks bouncing against their backs, their laughter faint but full of life. Beside him, Rachel was coloring in a workbook, humming a song about sunflowers. Grace was stacking papers nearby, occasionally glancing at him with that look. The one that always told him she knew he was thinking deeply, even before he did. "I've been wondering," Joseph said, finally breaking the silence, "what happens to the ones no one finds?" Grace looked up. "You mean, like you once were?" He nodded. "I got lucky. Ibrahim found me. But most men out there? Broken, lost, ashamed. They're not just hungry. They're invisible." That evening, as Rachel drifted off to sleep on the couch and Grace dozed with a book in hand, Joseph stayed up, scribbling in a worn leather notebook. Plans, ideas, names, places. He thought of the men he had shared benches with, the ones who once had jobs and families and dreams. He remembered their eyes, not wild but hollow. A month later, the Joseph Foundation was born. It began quietly, almost humbly, in a rented warehouse with peeling paint and a sign that read, "Dignity begins again." The foundation's mission was clear: not charity, but restoration. Joseph didn't believe in giving people handouts. He believed in handing them tools. He hired 2 barbers to train former street dwellers. Then he brought in a retired mechanic who offered to teach the basics of fixing bikes and scooters. A young entrepreneur helped design a course on running small kiosks. Joseph, meanwhile, taught communication, budgeting, and, more than anything, self-worth. At first, only 3 men showed up. One was mute, another refused to remove his torn hoodie, the third had been in and out of prison. But Joseph didn't flinch. He remembered what it felt like to be avoided, to smell of sweat and despair, to have your words dismissed before your mouth even opened. So he greeted them every morning with a handshake. He made them tea. He listened. By the 3rd week, 12 more men arrived. Soon the foundation became a quiet movement. Barber shops opened in empty stalls. Bicycle repair stations popped up near markets. Small booths began selling notebooks, umbrellas, boiled eggs, and fruit juice. And every time someone asked where these men came from, they answered simply, "Joseph believed in me." The media took notice. One headline read, "From street beggar to street builder, Joseph's mission to heal broken men." Another, "Betrayed, homeless, forgotten, until he chose to rise and lift others." Joseph didn't chase attention, but when asked for interviews, he accepted. Not for his ego, but for the ones still unseen. "It's not about me," he said on live TV one evening. "It's about reminding the world that broken doesn't mean finished, that men can cry, fall, lose everything, and still get back up." The impact was undeniable. Men who had once curled beneath bridges now taught classes. Some ran cooperatives. One started writing poetry. Another reunited with his estranged daughter. Joseph's name became a quiet echo of hope in alleyways and shelters. But Joseph never forgot the truth at the center of it all. He was once one of them, and that was what made the foundation real. Not perfect, not polished, just human. In a rented room above a dimly lit eatery on the edge of the city, Stella lived her days in quiet anonymity. No one recognized her anymore. Not the tired customers she served, not the vendors she passed on her way to work. Even her reflection in the mirror often startled her, as if a stranger had taken residence inside her skin. The woman who once wore pearls now wore aprons stained with oil. Her mornings began before dawn and ended with her falling asleep beside an old radio, humming distant news she no longer felt part of. But some nights, when the shift ended early and she managed a few minutes of solitude, she'd take out her cracked phone, connect to the neighbor's flickering Wi-Fi, and search for Joseph. At first, it was just curiosity. Then it became a ritual. She scrolled through photos of him standing outside his bookstore, smiling with children. She watched interviews where he spoke softly, but with a firmness she had never heard when they were married. She saw the sparkle in Grace's eyes. She saw Rachel resting her head on Joseph's shoulder, and she saw what she had thrown away. There were no headlines about her, no curious reporters asking for her story, just the quiet echo of what could have been. One night, sitting at the small table beside her window, Stella stared at a photo, Joseph and Grace holding hands, Rachel in the middle with a puppy in her arms, laughter frozen in time. The image blurred as tears filled Stella's eyes. She whispered, "I traded gold for sand." Regret, once a quiet whisper, had become a voice that screamed inside her. The man she had betrayed had become everything she had once wanted a man to be: kind, respected, whole. And she, once the woman who had everything, now had nothing but memories that stung like open wounds. The weight became unbearable. Later that night, in the loneliness of her narrow room, Stella made a decision. She wrote a short note. No names, no explanations. Just a single sentence. "I was wrong, and I don't know how to live with it." She opened the tiny window, the air cold against her skin. She stood still for a moment, as if waiting for the city to stop her. But the city kept moving, indifferent. Just as she placed one foot on the ledge, a sharp knock on the door broke through the silence. It was the landlord's wife coming to collect rent. 2 days early, by mistake. The door creaked open as the woman stepped in and froze. Screams, running, a call for help. Stella survived. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and silence. She lay there for hours, wrapped in sheets too clean for the chaos inside her. A nurse left a glass of water beside her bed. A police officer asked no questions. No one notified family. There was no one to call. And yet, somewhere in another part of the city, Joseph's face lit up a television screen as he spoke to a crowd of young dreamers. Stella watched silently from her hospital bed. She didn't cry this time. She just listened. For the first time, she was no longer watching with bitterness, but with grief, humility, and a heart cracking open under the quiet truth. She had once been part of his story. Now she was only part of his past. The hall buzzed with energy, 1,000 young voices murmuring, chairs shifting, footsteps echoing along the wide marble floor. Banners lined the walls bearing the words, "National Youth Conference, Rising Stronger Together." Outside, a line of television trucks hummed. Inside, rows of fresh faces, students, teachers, mentors, filled every seat. Joseph stood behind the curtain, heart steady but full. Grace had helped him pick out the suit, a clean gray one with crisp lines and a modest tie. Rachel had tucked a note into his pocket before he left. "Speak from your heart, Uncle Joe." President Ibrahim Traoré, seated in the front row, caught Joseph's eye as the announcer called his name. Ibrahim smiled and nodded, not as a leader, but as an old friend, silently saying, "It's your time." Joseph stepped onto the stage. He walked slowly, without a script, only the truth folded inside him, like a letter finally ready to be opened. The room fell quiet. He reached the podium, adjusted the mic, and paused. Then he began. "I wasn't always standing tall," he said, his voice calm. "I wasn't always clean or confident. There was a time I had nothing. No job, no home, no family, just shame clinging to me like a second skin." Whispers rippled through the crowd, eyes sharpened. "I lost everything because I trusted the wrong person. My wife betrayed me. I walked in on her with another man, and then I was kicked out of the house I built with my own hands. She took me to court and lied. I lost my home. I lost my reputation. I lost the will to fight." He looked out across the sea of young faces, eyes wide, brows furrowed. "I lived under bridges. I begged for food. People passed me by like I was trash. I stopped believing I mattered. A long silence followed. But one day, he said, voice warming, someone didn't walk past me. He was a friend from school, a boy I once helped when he couldn't afford books. Today, he's your president. A quiet gasp swept the room. Joseph glanced at Ibrahim, who was now wiping the corner of his eye. He didn't just give me food. He gave me a second chance, a home, a purpose. But most of all, he gave me back to myself. He took a breath. I'm not here to make you feel sorry. Don't clap for my pain. A beat. Clap for my rise. The room erupted, not with polite applause, but with something deeper. A roar of admiration, of belief. Students stood up. Teachers nodded solemnly. Cameras flashed. Some hands clapped wildly. Others pressed to chests. Joseph waited, letting the noise settle. He finished simply, firmly. My past didn't define me, but my kindness shaped my future. So be kind. To yourselves. To others. Even when the world forgets you, don't forget who you are. He stepped back from the podium. No music played, no lights flashed. But as Joseph walked off stage to the thunder of applause, for the first time in his life, he wasn't being seen through the lens of pity or pain. He was being seen for who he had become, and they were standing, not for his story, but for his strength. The mornings in Joseph's home were quiet, but never empty. The gentle clatter of Grace preparing breakfast, the rustle of Rachel flipping pages in the reading corner, and the occasional bark from their small dog blended into a harmony that sounded a lot like peace. The bookstore, once modest, had grown, not in size but in soul. It had become a second home to students, teachers, and even strangers. People came not just to buy books, but to talk about school, life, heartbreak, and hope. And Joseph always had time for them. They called him Papa Joe, a name that first made him laugh, then made him proud. Grace continued to teach at the nearby school, and Rachel, now reading full chapter books, insisted on helping out at the store after class. Life was simple, but Joseph no longer craved anything grand. He had lived through storms. Now he treasured the stillness. He sometimes caught himself smiling for no reason, then remembered, this life used to feel impossible. One morning, a black car stopped in front of the bookstore. A man in a tailored suit stepped out and handed Joseph a sealed envelope. It was an invitation. 2 days later, Joseph walked into the presidential residence, not as a guest in need, but as an honored citizen. Ibrahim welcomed him with open arms. You've come a long way, the president said, his voice warm. But this is for what you gave others. In the garden, with a small audience of national figures and foundation leaders, Joseph was awarded the National Inspiration Medal. The medal glistened gold in the sunlight, but the moment was bigger than its shine. You didn't just survive, Joseph, Ibrahim said as he pinned it to his chest. You lifted others. You restored dignity, not just your own, but for dozens of men who had lost theirs. Joseph, holding back tears, replied simply, I only did what one friend once did for me. The applause was soft, sincere, no fanfare, just a nation quietly honoring a man who never asked for honor. That evening, Joseph sat on the front porch beside Grace. A soft breeze stirred the garden, and Rachel was chasing their puppy across the lawn, giggling. They didn't speak at first. The sky was doing all the talking, a canvas of stars stretching wide, endless. Grace leaned her head gently against Joseph's shoulder. She really loves this home, she whispered. She's growing up in love, Joseph replied. That's all a child really needs. They watched Rachel fall onto the grass, laughing, the dog licking her face. After a long pause, Joseph spoke. Not loudly, just enough for Grace to hear. She picked sand, he said softly, but I found gold. Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hand found his, and they sat like that. Two people who had known pain, now resting in peace. As the stars sparkled above and the laughter of a child danced in the air, the story of Joseph came to rest. Not with a grand finale, but with the quiet truth that sometimes all it takes is one hand, one friend. No matter how far you've fallen, your story isn't over. It just needs one act of kindness, one person who sees your worth. Joseph's journey reminds us that dignity can be restored, pain can be transformed into purpose, and healing begins with hope. We all have the power to lift someone, just like Ibrahim did. You never know how far a helping hand can go. Ask yourself, who in your life might need that one gesture of kindness today? Will you be the person who stops and sees them? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.